Hello everyone, this is Professor DePaulo. Welcome you back to Site 265 Fully Online. And this week we're going to be talking about mixed design. So this is a design that is a combination of a between subject design and a within subject design. And a lot of interesting experimentation can take place using a mixed design. So just reviewing some things. Uh, if you're doing research, a lot of times you're reviewing the literature. You want to find peer-reviewed journal articles, and that's generally through Google Scholar and PsycInfo, as you've done earlier in the semester. And a lot of times you come across meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a really complex study that basically averages across many studies in the field. Whatever the research is involved in, it's taking a bunch of these studies and it's averaging the effect that was examined in each of the studies. Basically, statistically, were they able to reject the null hypothesis? Were they able to find the effect they wanted? Were they able to support the hypotheses that they postulated, right? And the meta-analysis basically gathers all these articles, looks at their statistics, and gives you an average, a summary of what has been found in the field across many articles. So if you come across these meta-analyses, these are kind of like a summary of many articles combined in that particular area that you're studying. And they're very useful to look at and to cite in your literature review, the beginning of the paper, the introduction. They're very difficult to actually conduct because you have to be able to do the statistics required to average out across all these different articles, these different published journal articles, and that involves looking at effect sizes and averaging them out. So it's a little bit more complex to actually complete, but it's very useful as a summary in the field of what the research has been showing over the past 10 years or so. You can go back even further if you need. I want to talk about a couple other designs really quickly that you may be familiar with. Single subject designs, and this is when you take one subject and you test them within groups. So basically you ask that one person to be tested multiple times. So it can be pre and post. It also could be like pre, post, and then 3 months later, and then 6 months later. You can have many different testing periods, but you're testing one participant multiple times. The simplest of these designs are used within clinical psychology, and they involve the A, B, and the variants of the A, B designs. So what the A, B design does is it has a single subject where you have a baseline, and that's called your A. That's your baseline measurement. So let's say I'm studying depression. Well, if I measure depression before I do anything as a researcher, that's the baseline measure. And that's the A in this design. The B is when you apply the intervention. So if I were to then give cognitive behavioral therapy, I would then measure the B after I've given you cognitive behavioral therapy. So then you would have an A, which is the baseline before any treatment, and the B would be after treatment, which would be cognitive behavioral therapy. So that would be an A-B design, and you would hope that the treatment would reduce the depression levels. The depression would be your dependent variable, right? So this is a within groups design, but it's single subject, and it's very common in clinical psych. You may even see ABA design. This is a variant of what I just talked about in terms of the AB design, where you start out with a baseline, which is A. So the same thing. I'm going to, measure depression before I start. That's your A. Then B is the intervention. So I give you a certain number of weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy, and then I measure your depression again, and I look to see that the depression goes down, right? That's your B. And then I take the therapy away again. So now let's say I stop the therapy and I wait a few weeks so that the effects of the therapy decline. And then I test you again, your levels of depression. So that's once again A. Now with the ABA design, you would expect that the intervention would produce a change. And then if you remove the intervention, which is the final A here, you would go back to something near baseline. So the second A should be similar to the first A. Whatever progress you made should be at least partially reversed when you remove the treatment, which is the B. Now, it may not be exactly the same as the original A because maybe the treatment has a long-term effect. But if I remove the treatment, I should go backwards. I should regress a bit, right? I should get worse. So depression level should go up once you stop the therapy. Now, they may not go back to the baseline, which is the first A, but they may go up to what they were after the intervention. So that's a little bit more complicated design, but it's not that complicated. All you have to do is remove the treatment and then measure again. And the final type of design is the ABAB design, which is a single subject within groups design used in clinical research. All of these are heavily used in clinical psych research. And this ABAB design is when you have a subject, you measure, let's say, depression, for an example, at A, the baseline. You provide the intervention, which in this case was cognitive behavioral therapy. That would be the B. And then you measure depression after that. You hope that it goes down, right? Depression should get better with therapy. Now I remove the therapy, I stop doing it, and I wait a few weeks, and I measure your depression again. That's your second A. Your depression should go up. Once you stop the therapy, your depression should go up. Now maybe it won't go completely up to what it was at the beginning, but it should go up a little bit. And then I provide the intervention again, which is the second B. And then the depression should go down once I give you the intervention once again. So here you're adding the intervention, you're removing the intervention, and then you're adding it again. And that gives you really strong evidence that the intervention is doing something because you've removed it and added it twice. And you've seen changes by removing it and then changes again by adding it. So that means that the intervention is working pretty well. Now, the caveat here is that it's only one person. This is a single subject design. So just because you get an effective AB or ABA or ABAB design does not mean the treatment works. It just means the treatment works for one person. And as a clinician or a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist, that might be good for you because you're designing this for the one client that you're working with. But as a researcher, only having one person in my study makes it very problematic to draw broad conclusions based off of this research. I would want to run a randomized controlled study with a bunch of people if I can. But this is something that you can run with one person, or if you're interested in just treating one person, you can run this kind of design as well. And in clinical fields, it's often run because clinicians are interested in treating their clients rather than coming up with general research statements or conclusions. So now I want to talk about the benefits of the mixed design. And these are the designs that I use all the time in my personal research. And I've talked countlessly about the different studies I've run, including the meditation studies. These studies that I've run, and in general, mixed designs, are a combination of between subjects and within subject design. So between subject design means you have different people in each group, and within subject design means you have the same people in each group, tested multiple times. You could actually have a combination of this. So you could have a randomized between groups variable, independent variable, and you could have those participants also take multiple measures. So depending on the level of the independent variable, they're going to take 2 or 3 repeated measures, responses, right? Or even just simply before and after. The strengths of each design offset the weaknesses of the other. So by combining them, you have a pretty strong design. The strengths of the between subject design is you have randomization. So you don't have to worry about any kind of threats to internal validity. You don't have to worry about people dropping out of the study because they're only tested one time. It's a pretty clean study. The benefits of the within subject design is the fact that it's easier to reject the null hypothesis because you're using the same people in multiple conditions, and therefore the variability will be decreased. So if you're using the same individual multiple times, you're testing them multiple times, they're going to vary less than if you use different groups of people. And so that is technically called power, statistical power. And power is the ability to reject the null hypothesis, or translated into English, the ability to find out or support your original hypothesis. That's a good thing. We all want highly powered studies because we all want to support our hypothesis. If the data supports our hypothesis, we want to be able to conclude that. We want to be able to find that in our study. And you can do that within subject design. It's easier to actually get the statistical significance you need to support your hypothesis. And that statistical significance is that p-value that I talked about. P is less than 0.05. And for some, that might be a foreign concept. I know I've talked about it multiple times. If you're not familiar with statistics, it can be a bit vague, although I am teaching statistics. So if you're around, I teach it usually every fall, and you're not graduating or moving on to bigger and better things. If you're around, take my statistics course, behavioral statistics. You'll learn a lot about research, because research and statistics kind of go together. You can't really separate them. So this mixed design really is the best of both worlds, because you eliminate the weakness of the between subject design, which is the low power, and you eliminate the weakness of the within subject design, which is the threat to internal validity due to confounding nature of order effects or subject mortality or history effects, maturation effects, these things we talked about previously. The disadvantage is it's very complex statistically, and we are not going to go anywhere near this in this research course. It requires a lot of bizarre elements like sphericity assumptions being met, and this goes way beyond the scope of the course. But take it as it's not that hard to run on a computer, but there are some more complex statistical requirements you need for this study. The main one being sphericity, which has to do with the covariance matrix, which you don't want to know about because it's just going to confuse you even more, but it's something you would get in a graduate level stats course. And of course, participant mortality. So this is the problem with anything that has a within subjects component, whether it's a purely within subject design or it's a mixed design, which is both between and within. Anytime you have where you're testing people repeatedly, the same participant multiple times, you have mortality. That doesn't mean that the person dies, although they could die if you're testing over many years or decades. But mortality means you lose people. They don't finish the study because of X, Y, and Z. I see this all the time in my studies at BMCC. You just lose people. I was running the 8-week meditation study. I lost almost 75% of my participants for the beginning, because students get busy, they have other things on their mind, they forget about your study, they get disinterested in your study, and they don't want to go back, and so you lose these people. That's common, and that's always going to be a problem with anything that has a within subjects or repeated measures component to it. This is always going to be a problem. And there's really nothing you can do to avoid it. You can follow up with them, send them email reminders, text reminders, phone calls. You could do that, and I have people do that all the time in my studies. It just doesn't matter. If someone's got something better to do and they're not really interested in your research, and you have them coming back week after week, they're just going to stop. They're going to, they get another job, or they have some other club they want to attend, or they're hanging out with their friends, or they're doing their work. And these are all reasons why they will stop coming to your study. And that leads to participant mortality. And that is a big threat to internal validity, right? I mean, that's, how good is your study if you don't retain people? That makes your study kind of more biased. Are the people in your study that stay, are they different than the general population? Who knows? That's a problem. You have to kind of try to defend against this by getting a lot of people, especially at the start. And here's a general comparison of between and within subjects design. It's kind of a summary of what you've learned previously. In terms of between subject design, you have different people in in the different groups. So each participant can only get one condition, one level of treatment. Or if it's a factorial design that's between subjects, they get one combination of the treatments. They get one cell of the study. They cannot be measured more than once. For between subjects, each subject is only measured once. Now that's good because you don't have to worry about mortality because the person only shows up one time and they're done. So there's a benefit of that. The problem with that is it can be, the power of the study can be lower. That means it's harder to find what you're looking for if you're running a between subjects design. The strengths of the design are, like I said, you only test them one time. So it has good internal validity. You don't have to worry about fatigue, which is, you don't have to worry about maturation, which is fatigue. You don't have to worry about history effect, which is something happens to your participants, between, the different conditions, like some natural disaster or some event happens or family issues, school issues, etc. And that can screw up their results later on. Right? So that's history effect, maturations, you have the fatigue factor. People get tired of, keep doing the study, especially if the study's long. You have mortality. So you don't have to worry about any of those things if you have between subject design. And you randomly assign participants only to one condition. It's a very simple design. That doesn't have to do with the representativeness of your sample. Like, you still have to be careful with your sampling. Right, so it's not a panacea for everything. You have to have, if you want to sort of extrapolate to the general population, you need to have a random sample with both of these, right? But it's a much easier design to run than between subjects, much easier, but a little harder to find out, to support your own hypothesis, because it's statistically harder to reject the null hypothesis here. The within subject design, it's cheaper, because you're using the same participants over and over again. So you have to pay less people. That's a bonus because money is always an issue. I always run out of money in my studies. You just can't get enough funding. I mean, I just apply for grants. Sometimes I get them. Recently, I haven't gotten them. And you don't have money, you don't have any kind of research. The benefit also is power. So it's easier to support your hypothesis because you have less variability, because you're using the same people in each condition, so the variability is less. So it's easier to reject the null hypothesis. The problems, of course, are order effects, maturation, history, all these things, mortality. These are all problems within subject design. And it's tricky getting them to stay in the treatment. It's really tricky. So my advice, if you're running within subjects and you can do this, run them close together in time, if possible. So even like the same session, if you're running within, you can give multiple conditions, within the same experimental session or time, give them an hour block to do the study. It's best to get them all at once if you can. Because if you have them come back in 2 weeks, or you have them keep coming back every 2 weeks for the next 2 months, guess what's going to happen? They're just not going to come back. And your study is going to be severely hampered by this. Even with all the outreach and the calling and the texting, people just ignore this, unfortunately. You beg them, please stay in my study. It's really worth your time, and, we'll pay you. It doesn't work because, real life happens. School happens, childcare happens, family issues happen. Job happens, right? And this kind of screws up people coming back, week after week or month after month for a long period of time. So try to keep the within subjects, the number of times you're actually measuring the dependent variable here, try to keep that to as minimal amount as possible. So you don't lose people, you don't have mortality affect your study. Here's what a mixed factorial design looks like. So you see these are different participants. So you have 10 participants here. You have 4 cells. So there's 4 treatment conditions. Now, if it was between subjects, you would need, if you had 5 in each group, 5 times 4, you would need 20. If you're running it as mixed, You only need 10 here. So it saves you half a sample. That's important, right? You don't need 20, you need 10. So you need half the number of participants than if this was fully between and randomized. The other advantage is you can compare. So in this experiment, and this is exactly similar to how I run my studies. In this experiment, what they did was they were looking at GRE scores. So GRE scores was the dependent variable, and they randomly assigned people to either get the Princeton Review study course, because Princeton Review offers all kinds of study courses like SAT, GRE, GMAT, LSAT, MCAT. They offer all of them. They make tons of money on that stuff. Or Kaplan, which is another popular service. These are two very popular programs for test preparation to help you study for these standardized tests for graduate school. And the GRE is a standard test for graduate school that most people have to take. And so they randomly assign participants to either get Princeton Review or Kaplan. So that is your between subjects variable, right? The type of instruction. And there's two levels here, Princeton Review or Kaplan. And you randomly assign participants. So that's between subjects. Now you have each participant take the GRE at baseline or before. So before getting the review sessions, they take the GRE at the beginning. That gives you a baseline. And then they get the review sessions, either Kaplan or Princeton Review, and then they take the GRE again afterwards, and they're looking for improvement. And so not only are you looking to see who's improving, but you're looking to see, do more people that get Princeton Review, do they improve? Or do more people that get Kaplan improve? And that could tell you which one is better. So if you're deciding how much, they're very expensive programs. I mean, in general, Kaplan and Princeton Review cost a fortune. Even the books are expensive. It's like self-study. But if you actually go to the programs where you have to attend these test preparation classes over a period of 1 or 2 months, they're extremely expensive. A lot of people, can't afford to pay thousands of dollars for this test prep, but some people can. And some people's parents have money, and they don't. The parents will pay. It's nice if you have parents that can just, drop a few $1,000s for a test prep for you, but most people don't have that. But there are some people that have this. And this way you can look to see whether Kaplan is better than Princeton Review or vice versa. Do people that get test prep with Kaplan, is there a bigger increase in scores pre and post for the GRE versus if they get Princeton Review? So this is a really basic, but also something that's extremely commonly used in psychology and in many fields. This mixed factorial where you have one between groups variable and you have one within groups variable. And I ran a variation of this kind of study where I randomly assigned people to either get meditation for 8 weeks or to get stress management for 8 weeks. That was my between groups factor, meditation versus stress management. But I also did pre and post with regard to depression, anxiety, somatization. So that was my within groups variables right there. So each person did a pre and a post, before the intervention, whether it's meditation or stress management, and then after the intervention. And I wanted to see what's better, do people improve more with meditation or stress management pre to post? And I found that definitely with meditation, people improve a lot more than with just stress management in terms of anxiety, depression, and somatization, which is basically physical symptoms that have no organic or medical basis. So this is a very commonly used design, and I personally use this constantly. Now, you would want to have a control group if you're running this kind of design. You want to control you want your treatment to be to be compared against a control group. Now, your control group can be a waiting list control group, and this has been done by many people running studies, especially in meditation. So what they do is they tell people, oh, by the way, you're going to be in the next group, so you need to wait a period of 1 or 2 months, and then we're going to get you into the study. And in the meantime, you're running, meditation with a bunch of other people, right? So you have a bunch of people doing meditation, and then you tell the waiting list group as a control group, you tell them stay at home and just wait, and we're going to get you in the study in another month. But in fact, they never get in the study. You just tell them to wait. So that's the waiting list control group. I don't know how much I love this. Uh, it's okay. It's definitely a placebo group. I mean, they're doing nothing. They're just waiting at home, so they're doing things they do normally. I'm not 100% convinced that it's the best kind of control group you could use. I mean, if you want to compare meditation and say meditation is better than doing nothing at home or doing what you normally do every day, which is probably not much in terms of relaxation. I mean, that's good if you have no knowledge of meditation at all. You want to see it's better than nothing. But if you show that your treatment is better than nothing, are you really showing that much? I guess you're showing something. You're showing that it's worth trying. But if you really want to show that your treatment is superior, then compare it not to the waitlist control group that does nothing, they just wait at home, but compare it to people that are doing an alternative intervention. So this is the treatment as usual group as a control group. And this is what I've done in my study. So I used stress management as my treatment as usual group, because what do people learn to do to reduce stress and reduce anxiety and reduce all these things? They do stress management courses, right? They offer them at schools, they offer them in the community, they even offer them online. And so this is what people are generally doing. They're starting with stress management. Yes, there's people that do meditation on their own, and there's people that do yoga and things like that, but the majority of people don't. They either do nothing about their stress, anxiety, and depression, or they do some basic things like stress management techniques that they teach in school, like journaling, maybe some breathing, etc. And you can find this everywhere. So I compared my meditation intervention to the stress management condition because that's the treatment as usual. That's what people normally do. That's what they've done in the past. That's why they have such a thing as stress management classes at colleges and in the community, because it's worked for people. So this has already been established, and I'm comparing the new intervention to the treatment as usual group. And I kind of like this control group better than the waitlist control group because it's actually showing that your intervention is better than what's been previously done. Not nothing. You're not comparing your intervention, in my case, meditation, to people doing nothing at home. You're comparing them to what is generally done in the community to reduce stress. And if my intervention is more potent than that, that's a bigger take-home point. It's a bigger message than my intervention is better than doing nothing at home, which is the waitlist control group. So I kind of like this treatment as usual control group. I think it's more potent as a control group. So I showed you how I did it, and people differ. Like some people who did the meditation research before me, they were using the waitlist control group. And they showed, yeah, meditation is better than the waitlist control group. Well, I would hope so, because those people aren't doing anything. I mean, you would want it to be better than that. I mean, that shouldn't be like all that surprising, right? And that's not all that interesting to me, that it's better than people doing nothing. But what's really interesting to me is it's better than people doing traditional stress management, because those are people actually doing something that's been, endorsed before and shown to work. And if my treatment is better than that, then that's really showing the potency of meditation. And what I found is huge differences, huge increases, huge reductions in terms of depression, anxiety, and somatization in meditation compared to stress management. That was really impressive. Like, those are huge results. I was shocked how big those results are. So that's kind of how I chose to run my study personally. Now, to do statistical analysis on your data, well, it's a little tricky. You need to do a mixed design ANOVA, which looks at the differences pre and post, and also the difference between the two groups, the independent variable, the between groups factor. And it does this in an ANOVA form, so you have to look for main effects, and you also look for interactions between the between subjects variable and the time variable, which is like the pre-post. They call, it's traditionally called like a time variable. That's the within groups variable. And then you can look to see if there's a difference. So you could actually look to see, is there a difference pre and post amongst all the people in your study? And then you can actually narrow it down and look at, is the difference pre and post bigger in one group than the other? So is it bigger in meditation versus stress management? And you can compare that and see if there's a statistical difference. So it's not that hard to run mathematically. Like, you wouldn't want to do this by hand because it's, a little trickier. But on a computer, if you use R or SPSS or SAS, it's pretty easy to run. So I ran in my study a 2x2 mixed ANOVA where the between groups factor was meditation versus stress management. Those were my two levels for that variable. And the within groups factor was before and after the treatment. So it was time, pre and post. And I found significant ANOVA for the mixed ANOVA. And if you want to report it, this is how you would write it out. This is an ANOVA, so you start with F. You have your within and between groups degrees of freedom. You have your F score. You have your p-value again, which is your statistical significance. You want this value to be less than 0.05. And you have eta squared, which is effect size. You want that to be large. It goes from 0 to 1. You want it to be closer to 1. The bigger it is, the better. That's the true effect of the independent variable, regardless of sample size. So, and this is something you would learn in a statistics class or even in a graduate level statistics class. So I'm not going to go in depth into this. And how do you minimize any kind of bias you might have running this kind of study? Well, you have to prevent something called experimenter expectancy effects. That means you as the researcher expect certain results from your participants. And you don't want to bias them. You don't want to sort of communicate this desire to have a certain result, because that might influence your participants' scores or behavior. And so this is something you have to be very careful of. And the one way to control this, both the influence that the experimenter has on the participant, and also the influence of the participant knowing what treatment they're getting, whether they're getting the control or the experimental condition. In order to reduce both of those, right, you would use a double-blind procedure. So that means both the experimenter administering the treatment and the participant receiving the treatment do not know what they're getting. You don't know what you're giving the participant, and the participant doesn't know what condition they're getting. And this is the best way to run any kind of randomized study when you have between groups factor. You want to make it double blind. That eliminates bias. Eliminates your expectation as a researcher and your influence on the participant, and also eliminates the participant's expectation of what treatment they're getting, because they just don't know. If they know what treatment they're getting, if they know they're getting the experimental treatment versus the control, that wrecks the experiment. So it's very important that they don't know, the participant does not know what they're getting, that if they don't know they're in the control condition or the experimental condition. Very important. And it's also important that the researcher doesn't know. So what I do is I assign people to conditions, and then I ask a research assistant to administer the treatments. And the research assistant does not know what treatment they're giving. And that prevents this effect, right? Now, in the case of the meditation study, of course, the people instructing meditation knew what they were giving, right? And the participant knew what they were receiving, but they were not familiar with the literature in terms of whether meditation is more effective than something else, right? So the people getting the meditation group, they don't know how well meditation is going to work, and they also don't know how it's going to work compared to a stress management condition. And that's important. They don't even know the other condition. They had no idea that other people were getting stress management. They thought everyone was getting meditation. And by thinking that eliminates any kind of bias on their part. So you want to try to eliminate bias in both directions, from the researcher's point of view and the participant's point of view. So I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that clarifies some of this. It's a mixed designs are very useful. They're very common. Statistically, they're a little bit more complex, but the basic concept is what you want to really take home. Having a between subject factor independent variable and having a within subjects independent variable. That's what you need for a mixed design. And hopefully that clears it up and you enjoyed it. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.